Hey, good afternoon again. Now, human rights are the foundation stone of the international world order. They provide protection for the most important things needed to allow us to live life to the absolute fullest. In some ways, technology has begun to threaten the security of many of these fundamental rights. So, here to explore how to face these challenges and protect our rights with the Deputy Executive Editor of The Economist, Kenneth Cukier. Put your hands together for the Commissioner for Human Rights of the Council of Europe, Michael OFlaherty.
Michael, human rights. Artificial intelligence. I see a lot of people here, and they're all here for this session, but I want to sort of collect some data before we begin. I want to find out what they think. It's a very simple question. Who here thinks that AI, you must be here because you're interested, but let's see if you're more optimistic or pessimistic, or dystopian. Who here is here today because you think that AI has a fundamental sort of tendency to violate human rights, and you see a dystopian, dark future where AI is problematic? Raise your hand. Raise your hand. Okay, so that's like 11.6% of you. All right, who here says, actually, no, AI is absolutely fantastic, and I'm really optimistic about how AI is going to be going forward. Yeah, we need to bring legal rights to it and all of that, but largely positive. Raise your hand. A little bit more. So why are the rest of you here? You're sort of there's this big mass in the middle of 80% of you that is sort of listening to it. What it could possibly be? So the only thing I can interpret from this is A, you've got a lot of work to do still, and B, you're not doing it enough. Is that a fair assessment?
Well, the first thing is I wouldn't have raised my hand to either of your questions. It's not the unavoidable dystopian future. It's not the perfect future. The reason we're all here, the astonishing energy in these buildings today and tomorrow, is because we believe in the potential of AI to transform our world for the better. That's a vision of AI delivering on human rights, delivering for human thriving, delivering for the human in society. It's everything from the guys talking about education a few minutes ago through to all the obvious areas that we repeat every day. But it's dangerous too. It's tricky stuff. We need a roadmap to get from where we are now to that future in which AI delivers on all this promise and potential for human well-being. And the roadmap for that pathway, or at least central to the roadmap, can be human rights. Human rights is about the minimum standard to protect all the aspects of our human thriving, our civil rights, political rights, social rights, economic rights. We need guardrails, as it's often put, and that's the role that human rights plays.
Okay, so
it's about prevention, it's about prevention, not chasing after the violation or the thing that went wrong.
Okay, so you've actually anticipated my question, but let me sort of phrase it because I think it'd be useful to sort of understand what we're talking about. We have such a thing as legal rights, and we've got the legal protections. But now you're referring to a human rights framework. You're referring to human rights, not legal rights. What are the difference?
Yeah, there's a lot of confusion about language. For a long time, when we spoke about putting guardrails around AI, the talk was about ethics. And so there, when people said human rights, they meant ethics, which are these subjective frames, and my ethics can be totally different to your ethics, and none of them is grounded in a legal obligation. But when I refer to human rights, I'm referring to the signed-up commitments of our countries. There are 46 member states of the organization I work for, the Council of Europe. They've signed up to the European Convention on Human Rights, to 200 treaties, actually. And then there's all the UN treaties. So for me, it's these legal obligations. But we need to drill down and figure out what applying those, respecting those, looks like in practice in the context of AI. That's where the work needs to be done.
Before we talk about AI specifically, may I ask a very sensitive and despairing question? You come from a human rights law background. You're a human rights lawyer. Now you're overseeing at the Council of Europe this great continent and how it actually is trying to impose human rights in its instantiations, many, many treaties. But it's very easy to sign a treaty. It's actually hard to get them to sign, but then they've signed it and then they walk away. Zimbabwe has signed all the human rights treaties that you can name. Yep. They still do not respect human rights. They violate human rights. So what share of countries adhere to those treaties? And if they're not accepting human rights in practice, in all the ways in the analog world human rights can be violated, what hope is there that AI will be respected in practice too?
It's a fair question. But at the same time, we tend to look at human rights where it's broken, not where it's working. And a hell of a lot of the commitments that states have signed up to are being honored every day. That's why we can meet here in relative freedom. We can speak to each other in relative safety. That's because this country is respecting our human right to do those things. 85 to 90% of the judgments of the European Court of Human Rights are implemented. That's a remarkable figure. That shows very high levels of compliance. But I want to agree with you. Signing up to a treaty is not the same thing as delivering the treaty. But delivering the treaty is not just about will, it's also about the tools. I said earlier, it's hard. We need to figure out what human rights oversight of, let's say, AI looks like in practice. Now, a lot of work is being done to develop those tools right now. Council of Europe is doing it. The UN is doing it. Private organizations, private companies are doing it. We're making a lot of progress. So we need to keep investing in the how-to machinery, and then we need to roll it out. And that's before we even get to talk about forcing anybody to do anything.
In a previous instantiation of revolutionary information technology, it turns out that there was a linchpin value that needed to be upheld in order for everything else to happen, for it to flourish. The technology was the printing press, and the value that needed to be instantiated was freedom of speech. Right? There was no freedom of speech before there was the rules and laws, before there was the printing press. When Socrates was condemned for corrupting the youth of Athens, he did not avail himself of the freedom of speech because it did not exist. It required an information revolution to create, for the world to understand this need, that once you have freedom of speech, you have everything else. You've got capitalism, you've got democracy, you've got liberalism. So does AI offer us the possibility, or that there's something new in the world and that there is a linchpin value that we can see today, that once we need as a flagpole in the sand, we get lots of other values after it?
Well, look, the value is clear to me. The value is protecting the human, protecting the full thriving, the honoring of the dignity of each and every human being. That's the value. And we have to make sure that AI delivers on that through its goals, but also through avoiding the harm that can happen along the side. But I thought you raised a really interesting point, that human rights tend to emerge after the threats and the challenges and the printing press. You gave that example. And the question arises, will we need new human rights in the context of AI? The jury's out. It's important to recognize that what we have already, if we learn how to apply it, is already tough enough. But there's AGI. Will we need a new human right that AGI be banned? Will we need human rights, a human right to tackle the enormous disparities? The digital divides, digital literacy and illiteracy, the challenges global south, global north. These are open debates, but let's not undervalue what we already have and use the tools. We need to roll out now tools already far in development on such issues as of life cycle human rights testing of AI. We need algorithm-neutral testing tools, but it's all eminently doable if we can just develop the sensitivity and get past this ultimately limited discussion about ethics being the frame.
Okay, so we have human rights as a way of ensuring that AI aligns with human values. Why wouldn't we have AI protect and ensure that AI aligns with human rights for human values?
I think that's a very interesting point. Take a very practical issue right now. When we insist for human rights oversight of AI that there be complete transparency of the technology. The tech people will frequently come back to us and say that's not doable. It is simply impossible to shine that degree of light on the technology. I'm not a tech guy, I'm a human rights lawyer, so I can't judge that response. But what I can say is, can we design an AI piece of tech to help us to deliver the transparency. My limited brain, at least I see that there's at least a potential for a conversation there, which, by the way, raises another issue, that if we're to deliver meaningful human rights oversight of AI, we have to develop mutual literacy. It's still far too much the case that people like me don't understand the tech side of the debate, and the tech side doesn't understand the human rights side. This leads to so many misunderstandings, like that too much strong oversight, too much regulation, too much human rights will hamper innovation. This is something you hear very much. This is one of those myths that's allowed to flower because it's not challenged. And if we could learn to speak to each other and listen to each other, I think we could get past a lot of these things.
Okay, so hearing you speak, I'm reminded that, in fact, there was a person who who felt like he did have a foundational principle in the world of AI, and that was the late Daniel Dennett, the philosopher. And he had said that there should be a must-disclose provision if you're interacting with an AI, that it's not allowed to pretend that it's a human, that you can never be, there can be no deception that it's not human. What do you think?
Yeah, look, one of the scariest things right now is these anthropomorphic chatbots. They frighten the life out of me, because this is trained AI, trained to pretend to have emotions, trained to pretend to care, to love, and things of this nature. And we know we have charted suicides through engagement with chatbots operating in this way. It's an extraordinarily dangerous development in generative AI, and it needs to be tackled, including from a regulatory point of view.
So I can completely agree with you, but I could also make the case that if we have very good AI, it would be able to identify the tendency that someone is going on the path towards suicidal thoughts, and it might find the mechanism by which it can make an intervention to prevent that from happening.
I'm sure that's possible, but without deceit. The anthropomorphic chatbot is deceitful. The AI has learned how to pretend to exhibit certain human characteristics. And as a result, the human engaging reacts thinking they're engaging with a human-like entity, and we get these disastrous, horrific results.
So do you want to knock on the door of Brussels and capitals and say, hey, I think I've got an idea, let's impose a law?
That's already, that shift's passed in Europe. we have the AI Act. Let's see how it's going to work. It's still very early days. It's a very heavy piece of regulation, but a lot of thought went into it, a lot of deals, a lot of compromises. It's not perfect, but it's the world leader. We have, from my own organization, a new framework convention on artificial intelligence. Totally different type of instrument. It's a treaty. It doesn't tell you in minute detail, here's how you do everything. It says, we, the states who sign up, we're committed to human rights. We're committed to life cycle testing for respect for human rights. We're committed to strong national oversight. And then how they figure that out country by country is in large part their own doing. But I really hope that countries will, and by the way, any country anywhere in the world can sign up to this new convention, first of its kind. So I very much hope countries will look at it and see it as an interesting and useful practice to bring this regulatory discussion forward.
So let's talk about Europe as a venue for AI. It seems like if China's going in one direction, a very authoritarian way in which AI is being used to undermine human liberties, America's going in a different direction, particularly now under Trump, where it's going to be a very commercial approach, in which it's probably the companies, not the state, that will be undermining civil liberties. What is the opportunity that Europe has to be this island of reasonableness of AI and human rights joined together? Is that what's to play for?
Yeah, well, look, the first thing is that Europe is a laboratory, and that's already valuable in itself. We have to invest in that laboratory to make sure that the products of the laboratory are useful and fit for purpose. By the way, to do that, we need civil society much more actively involved. We have the negotiation of these instruments and treaties in Europe. We need the people who bridge the tech and the human rights worlds, who are mainly in civil society. We need them in the room. We need them in the negotiation room. We need them to help figure out what we're doing, help explain to us where we're going. And so this resistance to a civil society involvement in what are normally state-to-state activities has to be overcome. But hold on a second.
Okay.
The other thing we have to do, the other thing we have to do in Europe is get over this idea that all this regulatory experimentation is extinguishing innovation, which is very commonly said. It's mischievous. The facts don't back it up. Yes, Europe lags behind the US. It lags perhaps behind China in terms of innovation. But that's not because of regulation. That's because of a whole load of other reasons. Poorly developed capital markets, a fear of risk because of the very heavy bankruptcy consequences in Europe. The fact that our digital single market is not so single. These are the reasons that lie behind poor innovation, not the regulation. To the contrary, smart regulation triggers innovation. I'll give you an example, a European example. The GDPR, the privacy regulation. That didn't throttle innovation.
Cementing European businesses so they can't move.
Yeah, I have some sympathy for you, but nevertheless, the GDPR triggered an investment in innovation which would deliver on privacy, because with GDPR, people, citizens, consumers demanded respect for their privacy. And so in a peculiar way, GDPR triggered exactly the innovations which are now being copied worldwide as the GDPR itself is being copied.
Okay, so we've got facial recognition. We can see that there's problems there unless it sort of falls under human rights rules. We've got audio prints that are so beneficial with our banking, but actually can also be violated as well. Is there any emerging threats that you see from your role that others might not be aware of that they should have on their radar?
Yeah, well, look, I mentioned AGI earlier, and in a way, I did myself some harm, because all the talk about the dystopian future distracts us from the problems we have right now. One area that I'm very concerned about is the use of AI by the state, particularly for detection of social welfare fraud. We had a scandal a few years ago, 3-4 years ago in the Netherlands. Yep. You would have thought we learned from that. But the stories are emerging now of similar issues in France, similar issues in Denmark. So we have not knocked this one on the head yet. So that use of this, and by the way, the other thing about the state using AI is that the citizen, by and large, hasn't got a clue. And if the citizen doesn't know that AI is lying behind very consequential decisions about your social welfare, your unemployment benefit, your pension, then you don't know where to go to complain. So this is a very day-to-day practical area that worries me. The use of AI in the justice sector. Look, as long as AI is being used for administrative procedural stuff, no problem. But when AI is starting to make judgments, very scary. In the UK right now, if you apply for parole in England and Wales, you apply for parole, AI will do the first computation of risk as to whether you should be let out or not. If the AI proposes that you be held in, no human will intervene.
Well, surely if AI is better at assessing risk of reoffense, we'd want to use it, and if it's not, we'd be curious. I think the key issue is that we want the defense, or the defendant, or in this case, the party who's aggrieved, to have the transparency of process to be able to inspect it and to see that it came to the correct answer.
But we have to have the will to inspect it. That's the point I was about to finish there. That in this probation case, only the recommendations to let the person out were examined by a human. The recommendations to leave the person locked up just passed through. They weren't reviewed by the human. And this concerns me. We need human oversight of human impactful decisions. It's laborious, it goes against the logic of efficiency, but it's absolutely essential, particularly in the justice sector.
But it might go down, right? The whole idea of bank loans in America, FICO, was born of the fact that every bank manager in the 1950s was white, and every person in the South who was asking for a loan was black, and lo and behold, the bank manager saw them as a risk when they weren't. You needed to use the data or actuarial statistical approach in order to assess risk. So I think AI is going to, I think as long as there's inspectability, we will be better off. But if we simply say that there has to be a human being, we might be introducing bias.
Look, we need to keep the human in the story. And the more consequential for human well-being the story, the more the human has to be present.
Let me concur and maybe finish by saying we need to keep you in the story. Finish your thought, but we're almost out of time, but finish your thought.
No, I've forgotten what my thought was. You knocked me off balance so thoroughly. Look, all I want to leave us with today is the value of human rights as a pathway. Human rights is about human well-being. This carefully negotiated set of treaties is the roadmap towards that human well-being. We need to, in a sense, rehabilitate it, bring it back into the story, learn to talk each other, and realize this amazing future we all believe in.
Fantastic. Join me in thanking Michael OFlaherty. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Brilliant. That was fun. Great.
Thank you.